Welcome to part 2 of our conversation on the ethics of publishing difficult photographs, things that are emotionally difficult. Just so you know, a heads up, this is going to deal with sensitive subject matters. This will have hard to look at photographs as a part of this presentation. So just as a heads up, we'll look at those as a part of this. So in the part 1, we sort of looked at historical examples. We looked at situations where editors have had to decide either to run something or not run something, and how they've come to that conclusion. We looked at examples from the 60s, we've looked at examples from the mid-90s, and we looked at a most recent example from a couple years ago covering the migrant crisis. And as a part of that, we looked at some strategies that editors have taken, including putting warnings, making you have to click through something in order to view it, using shadow boxes to potentially censor it a little bit and click through to get off of those boxes, as well as sometimes editors deciding not to run something at all. But let's move again towards a sort of an understanding of the world we live in and how the same old conversations about when to publish something or when not to are entering a new realm, as well as what happens when we need to retract. So remember from our very first conversation about journalistic ethics in photography, or photojournalistic ethics, if you will, we talked about this guy, Nick Ut. He took the photograph of the girl running from a village after napalm had been incorrectly dropped there. The photograph became sort of popularly known as Napalm Girl. Remember, he became friends with the little girl, and they are still friends to this day. And so there's been a lot written about the decision, sort of historically about the decision to run this photograph, to even send it out of the darkroom where it had been developed. This is sort of a synopsis, a clip from one of the historical write-ups of it. And it sort of tells the story of the fact that they almost didn't even send it out. It says the two editors came after lunch. When they saw the picture, they said, "We don't think we can use this picture in the paper because she's too naked." When my boss came back and saw the pictures, he asked, "Who took the pictures?" They said, "Nick Ut." He asked, "Why didn't we send these pictures right away?" The editors replied, "You think these pictures are they think these are pictures we can use because she's naked." And if you sort of go on to read the rest of it, you'll explain that, I mean, very early on, they didn't think that they were even going to be able to run the pictures at all, that they should even send them from the Associated Press office. They ended up deciding to send those out. They ended up being incredibly popular. It's sort of another snippet from that story. One of the editors asked him again, quote, "You think we can use these pictures?" My boss replied, "I don't care. Write a caption, move." So you get a sense of that there was debate here, that there was conversation. People were concerned about sending this photograph out from the Associated Press to others. And there was a lot of debate in newsrooms about even running the picture in newspapers on the other side of things. And that was you can read a lot about that. There's been a lot written in ethics books. But one thing I would like to talk about here now is that this debate came back up last year when Facebook started censoring the photograph. When it had been posted to Facebook. Initially because of an editorial system that they had built up to flag photographs they thought were nudity, and then other moderators of the site keeping it down. It ended up sort of they had to reverse around because of the backlash they got at the time that was pointing out that this was a very iconic photograph, and that this was a photograph that was not trying to do anything more than to really show the horror of a war that had taken place. And so Facebook ultimately changed their minds, ended up allowing the photograph to be on there, and have changed their policy involving historical photos. So that brings us to this point, which is when to change your mind about something. What about retractions? What about pulling a photograph down that's already there? Because there's a good chance if you do anything involving photojournalism long enough, you're going to be asked to unpublish a photograph from the web. Someone's going to call you and say, "Hey, we really need you to take this picture down," or "We would really like it if you took this picture down." It's kind of inevitable because there's crowds and crowds of people in this world. And so inevitably, if you go out and shoot anything in public, you are going to get pictures of people who didn't necessarily know they were a part of a picture. that ends up being most of the that ends up being sort of most of the requests you'll get are, hey, I didn't know I was going to be in this picture, can you take it down? Or one that I've actually seen a lot of, which is, hey, I look really ugly in this picture, could you please take this picture down? Really what you need to do is this. Have an internal ethics system where you're going to ask yourself, hey, does the potential harm of this photograph staying up outweigh the benefit that would be gained by taking it down? So if you, in this situation, weigh the potential harm, you probably say, no, I'm not going to take this photograph down just because you don't like the way you look in it. That's not a good enough reason to take a photograph down. Sometimes it's a situation where people may get in trouble for what is in the photograph itself. And again, you have to weigh the considerations. You have to say, hey, maybe it's something to this. So, for example, let's say you take a picture of people at a party, people drinking alcohol or something like that. And then you get someone who says, hey, look, I'm underage, and you ended up getting a picture of me while I was underage holding a drink. I'm worried this is going to make it so that I can't get jobs, or I may get fired from the job I have. It'll, follow me the rest of my life or something like that. You really have to weigh these decisions. I would say in situations that like this, you as the photographer were not the one who forced them to drink underage, so you're not really responsible for taking that photograph down off of the internet. However, there are situations where you may find yourself where the act of taking the photograph down does warrant a conversation. It does actually lead to something where taking it down would be beneficial and would outweigh the idea, or outweigh the fact the photograph exists on the web to start with. This is one that I actually went through. Back in the late 2000s, 2008, there was a heavily disputed election in Iran where the reformist sort of challenger, by all accounts, most likely had an election stolen from them by the guy who was in charge at the time. And so this was very unpopular. Lots of people were protesting it in Iran itself. People in the United States who were either Persian or had family members in Iran, etc., were protesting it. And protests were in lots of different cities. This is in Washington, D.C. This one was in New York City. And even Orlando, a city that I was reporting in at the time, had protests, had people who were out protesting the election in Iran. And one day, shortly after, about a month after I had gone out and reported on this, taken pictures for it, my boss gets a call from someone who was in one of the photographs. And the person in the photograph asked, hey, would you mind if you take the photograph down? The person in the photograph said that most of, or at least some of their family was still living in the country in Iran, and they were worried that even though this was a small publication, this was a small paper in Seminole County, Florida, that someone in the Iranian government may see that this woman was at this protest, and that their family could be in trouble because of it. There may be some sort of retribution involved. And so here I was trying to make the decision based on something that happened in Orlando, and I was covering it from a little paper in Seminole County in Oviedo, making a decision about something that involved geopolitical issues in the middle of Iran. Sort of goes to show you, especially in photojournalism, how the world can be much smaller than you think it is. Ultimately, we made the decision to take the photograph down, that ultimately it wasn't worth risking someone's family member's life just to have this photograph posted to the web, and we could run the story without the picture too. So we just took it down from the web, and everything was fine. So really that's a good thing to sort of end our conversation on ethics with, which is every single ethical situation you're ever faced with, you never want to take it automatically. You want to sit down, you want to weigh out the pros and cons, and you want to make a reasoned, careful decision. So with that, we have sort of wrapped up our conversation on ethics, looking at the ethics of being a photojournalist in the field, as well as the ethics of being an editor and deciding what to publish, how to publish it, and when to publish it, and then sometimes when to retract it. So with that, I look forward to seeing the work you turn in for this next upcoming assignment.